Hey, good morning to everybody. It's Daryl P here, aka Artist in Recovery, and this is the time of the morning where I usually do my spoken word video, and then I memorize it and I do the street rhymes video. This morning I did a very personal video about my girlfriend and soulmate, Audrey, passing away from COVID, and how I feel about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., not knowing how many Americans died from COVID when he talked to the Senate committee yesterday. And I'm not going to do the street rhymes video, I don't think. I may still do it, but I needed to say what I needed to say. If you watch the video, it took a lot out of me. I was actually shaking after I did the video. It's been over 4 years, and it doesn't get any easier. What I am going to talk about is articles that have come out about Charlie Sheen. And I've always kind of related to Charlie Sheen. I've had people tell me, I'd say at least a half dozen people over decades, that I look like Charlie Sheen. And with his addiction, I feel a lot in common with him. One thing I want to say that I should have said at the beginning of this video is I don't think I'm going to monetize this one video. Whenever I monetize a video, YouTube is very, really looks over the video with a fine-tooth comb. And I get yellow lighted if I talk about anything very important, very personal, anything about substance abuse. So I don't think I'm going to monetize this video. If you watch this video, please watch some of my other videos if you like this video, if you can relate to it, because I'm probably not going to make any money off this video. I'm probably not going to monetize it just because I wanted to get out there. The reason I'm making this video is because I know that there is thousands of other men out there that have gone through this. The reason I'm talking about this is because I'm going to be 60 in January, and I just don't give a shit anymore. I could honestly say that. I really don't. You know, I know who I am at this point in my life. And like Charlie Sheen actually says in these articles, he says it's liberating as hell just to get this out. He says once he admitted that he'd been with men, he said a train didn't come through the restaurant. Nobody ran in and shot me. The building didn't explode. It's a release. Like I said, I know who I am at this point in my life. I've been clean and sober, coming up on 19 years, completely clean and sober. The last time I smoked crack cocaine was October 23rd, 2006, almost 19 years ago. All right. Let's get into this. Charlie Sheen, in the Book of Sheen, I guess it's coming out. I haven't read it yet, but I've read some of the excerpts. I think this is in it. He talks. I think he talks about, or it's come out, that he's donated over $25 million anonymously to different charities throughout his career, and I find that I find that uplifting. You know, there's a really good. I think everybody has a really good side of them. A lot of times, like with celebrities, you see the worst of them, and it's really good to see that there's a good person inside there. You know, being a recovering addict, I know, but a lot of people probably just see him as a crackhead. He's made up, or he's kind of buried the hatchet with his ex Denise. I can't remember her last name right now, but that's not what this video is about. He talks about, in this video, he talks about having sex with men. And, it's a well-known thing that he was quite a ladies' man, that he was with all these porno stars and had all these parties at his mansion. But he talks about having sex with men. And I've talked about this before. The same thing. Not only is the same thing happened to me back when I was using, but it happened to the people I was using with, the guys I was using with. I've heard these stories over and over again. Cocaine and sex affect the basal ganglia. I'll put a link down below to some basic chemistry, some basic info. And I remember taking a hit, and I mean literally, as soon as I let that hit out, my personality, my whole attitude just flipped. It's literally the moment that smoke came out of my mouth. My priorities, my thoughts. I really turned into a different person. That's another reason why I'm talking about this. One thing that's different between me and Charlie Sheen is he says that some of these episodes with guys were fucking fantastic or great or something along those lines. And I don't have that same feeling. Looking back at what happened when I was using, it wasn't me. Like in the last 19 years that I've been clean and sober, those urges, those feelings, those cravings, whatever you want to call it, not only have they not come back, but I look back and I wonder why or how I found that satisfying or tempting or whatever. And I look back and I know that's not who I was. It was the drugs acting on me. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Like I said, the reason I'm making this video is for two reasons. Number one is now that I'm almost 60 years old, I just don't care. I know who I am and I don't care what anybody thinks. I really don't. I remember hearing when I was younger, I remember hearing like older people say that they just don't care. They can say whatever they want, that they're older. And I always thought that was just an excuse. But now that I'm almost 60 years old, I know exactly what they mean. There's no more fear of being judged. I know who I am. My family, my loved ones, they know exactly who I am. So, if anybody else wants to misjudge me or characterize me or whatever, have at it. 'Cause it doesn't affect my life. And I almost feel sorry for the people that do that. All right, so let's get into it. Like I said, my whole personality would flip. And I became extremely sexualized after I smoked. Most of the time when I smoked, I'd be by myself in my car, and I'd stop in a parking lot after I picked it up from a dealer. I'd take a hit, and immediately my plans for the day, whatever, would change, and I would drive to an adult bookstore. And I remember feeling excited driving to the bookstore, of all the things I was going to do, because they had arcades in the back room. Like I said, looking back, hearing myself say this now, it's like I'm talking about somebody else. And I think a lot of this had to do, because once I got to these bookstores, they have the arcades in the back room. And I would go in the back, and there was what they call glory holes through the wall. And what happened in those rooms was I always acted in one manner, where I was the one being serviced. And that's number one. That's the thing that always happened. And number two, it never finished. I was never to completion. Like I always stopped before satisfying. I stopped before orgasm. I always did. And looking back, I think it's a psychological reason, because I was abused by the cop that was dating my mother back when I was 11, 12, 13, 14 years old. And now I think I can understand why I did that. I think it was about control. Back then I didn't have any control. And then when I would go, the cocaine would act on a very sexual nature on me. But then it would also, once I went into those arcades, the feeling of having control over people that I relate to, that cop that abused me, that now I have control over these people. I think that's, I'm not a psychologist, but it makes sense to me. Like I said, because it was, out of the hundreds of times I went into these adult bookstores, thousands of times, it was always the same situation where I would be serviced and I would stop and just leave before finishing. Like I said, now looking back, I think it was control. Yeah. And then now none of this, none of this is enticing to me whatsoever anymore. There was a time when I first got clean. One of the reasons that I had a hard time getting into recovery was I was terrified, because I knew that my sexuality, there'll be some links down below, where one of the dangers of using crack cocaine is that you become cross addicted with sex and crack. And it talks about how people act out in dangerous ways when they're smoking. And I thought that I would never be able to have a normal relationship. Like, how can I possibly get clean and date a woman when every time, as soon as I get excited, there was times when I was using that I would just see a girl in a bathing suit, a woman in a bathing suit, and I would think of my drug dealer's phone number. I'm not even, that happened all the time. The two were so interconnected that they were interchangeable. The one went with the other, and with, no exceptions. But I managed to stay celibate for the first years of my recovery. And I think that gave me a foundation to get to know who I am again. And that hasn't returned. Now I can have normal relationships. I've had 2 great relationships with 2 women over the last 19 years, long-term relationships. The first one for a little over a year, and then the last one I lived with Audrey for 4 years until she passed away from COVID, which brings me back to the beginning of this video. So I make this video for the guys out there that have been through this, that know what I'm talking about, and are too ashamed to talk about it because they have family, they have children, they have jobs where their bosses wouldn't understand. I don't have any of those things. So I could talk about it. My family knows who I am. They know what I've been through. And I'm not scared to talk about this stuff. Another thing I almost forgot. It wasn't just the bookstores. I remember at least 3 occasions, 3 different friends. I mean good friends that I went to high school with, that I ended up using with, where we were using, we get the brilliant idea to put an X-rated movie on, and before you know it, one of us was servicing the other, and this just isn't, it wasn't who we are. Not that there's anything wrong with being gay, but looking back, I could see how this drug really strongly affected my sex drive, to the point where I was doing things that just were out of my nature. They really were. Let me be a little more honest here too. Over the last 19 years, I'm gonna be completely honest. Over the last 19 years, I haven't had the urge to go to bookstores or hook up with guys in the least. None of that is enticing to me. But I'm gonna be completely honest. There's been times where I was in a self-gratifying situation and you fantasize in your mind, and there's been times where the fantasies I used were other than heterosexual fantasies. But I've heard it said before that fantasies should stay fantasies. A lot of times people that act out fantasies, like there's people that act out threesome fantasies, like to their wife and another woman. And a lot of them, things are best left being fantasies, because once you act them out, the reality of it is not the way you picture it in your head. It's not anything like the way you picture it in your head. So that being said, I'm a straight guy. I have good relationships now, but there was a time in addiction that that wasn't the case. All right, the links will be down below. Recovery is possible. I've been clean and sober since October 23rd, 2006, coming up on 19 years, completely clean and sober. If you like this video, also too, I did a video commercial, testimony for Root Recovery, Daryl on Root Recovery on Instagram and TikTok. Check out my commercial. It's really good. Recovery is possible. Have a great day.